intimate
here.
days,
Yes,
Dave.
isn't it? A very interesting subject, which is probably a baffle a few people as well.
Yes, it endlessly battles the relationship between business and academia, value, if you like, from both sides. So we'll spend a few minutes today kind of going through the relationship, if you like, between the Innovation Centre and the University of Sussex, the way that works, and if you like, the value that businesses can gain from that relationship, and then chat through how we work for the university in partnership with commercialising new technologies that come out of the centre, come out of the university, as well as looking at potentially how you could use students for building. Obviously, you're building interesting new companies, so you're looking to recruit skills into the business for growth, etc., etc. So it's a nice intimate little thing. So I shall sit here and I feel like getting a guitar on my lap or something like that.
So Pete Laney's been working with the Innovation Centre for over 10 years, I think, is it?
No, 8. Yeah,
8 years,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So he's been working down on the campus for some time. He's here quite regularly working with our companies as well. So I'll just pass over to you, right, Pete?
Yeah. So I'm the Innovation Support Team Manager down at Falmer. So I head up the support team down there. As some of you will know, we have a variety of different skills in the support team, from sort of sales, marketing, through to funding, and through to market research and some of those things. The way we work with academia and with the university also leverages that same support team and a similar process to the way that we work with startup companies and scaling companies as well. So my own background is from running a business for about 20 years or so with my brother and sister, which we built up, went on from there. And in 2007, I think it was, I discovered the Innovation Centre and came to work with Mike there as part of the support team. So stuff that we'll cover today is stuff that most of you guys in the room, I think, will probably already understand, the relationship between the Innovation Centre itself and the university. Academia and business, the kind of shared objectives and values, as well as the differences and approaches from both parties. Our role, and a little bit of detail about how we support research commercialisation within that. A few case studies, particular projects that, if you like, in practicality tend to put into focus some of the stuff that we do. And then just thinking about, as a business, how could that add value as you grow, scale, look to build in extra resources, etc., solve problems. And then feel free to fire any questions after that you feel will be relevant. So the University of Sussex in '96 was one of our original founding shareholders. In 2007, 2008, they bought out all the other shareholders, so we became wholly owned, although we operate as a separate standalone company. So that works for what we do. Key things that we do with the university are around commercialising research. They're around corporate and business networks, i.e. how does the university outreach to businesses of all scales. And we also do quite a lot around student entrepreneurship, so kind of experiential learning with the skills so that students go out able to either start their own companies or be much higher value within companies themselves in terms of developing new products. So in terms of shared objectives and values, there are a number of different areas where the university, if you like, has one objective, and the sort of the business alternative to that in terms of the value that it can get from it is kind of mirrored. So universities, particularly at certain stages in developing new and interesting research, look for collaborations with companies. They need that because they need a grounding in the problem, if you like, that companies have in a commercial context, as opposed to the problem they were originally trying to solve within the academic context. And there's often a mismatch there that we see very early on between the problem that the academic starts off trying to solve and, if you like, the value that they could ultimately give to business through commercialisation or through further development of that piece of research. Obviously for business that opens up some interesting innovation opportunities around developing future pipelines of products, innovative new ways of gaining potential monopolies within the market as they come out. Obviously, one of their key goals is ultimately commercializing the research. There's an interesting way that sits between the academic and the university. Universities would love to commercialize lots of stuff. Academics, it's not often the foremost thing in their mind. They become academics because they want to produce research as opposed to start a company or move a piece of research through a licensing agreement to value within a company. So there are different objectives that we have to cross there. Nevertheless, obviously that commercialization activity is particularly important to the university, and it ties into other objectives that they have that in the world of academia they would call impact, or something called the REF, which is kind of how universities get assessed for how well they're doing in solving problems within society with their research that's kind of going on. So what you tend to see is two different worlds, but it's only a change in language, really, to be honest, between what they're trying to achieve sometimes. There's obviously academic consultancy that goes on, so academics within Sussex are given a fairly wide license to work on independent consultancies with companies. They have something like 30 days a year that they're allowed to generate money coming into themselves by doing that. And that obviously is an opportunity if you find the right academic. If you like, it's kind of academic dating between companies and particular skills, to add an injection of fairly high-level expertise into how you might solve a problem within a particular company. So there's quite an interesting area there, and one of the key problems with that, and I don't know if anyone's experienced this practically within the room, is how you find the right person within a university to actually help you solve those problems, and at what level you want to find them. There's obviously employment for students. Universities want to see their students get the best employment opportunities as they come out of education at all sorts of different levels. That can be anything from graduate level up to postdoctoral level, whatever it may be. And again, from a point of view of a business, there's a fantastic opportunity to engage with young talent at an early age to bring them in to add value to your business. So engaging with the university, if you like, as a recruitment source can be a really, really positive thing to do. We solve that in a number of different ways. The Innovation Centre ourselves, and some of you guys in the room will be aware, we have something called the Catalyst Team, which is kind of like a year's placement scheme, but specifically designed, in our eyes, to solve the problems of startup or scaling businesses. So it's about project level support as opposed to kind of year-long placement. So we set lots of different projects within companies, and it gives you a flexible way of being able to solve problems within your business without taking on the overhead of someone being within the business for 12 months. And something that I think the University of Sussex is heading towards developing is a kind of exec education. So looking at potentially how things like the business school could move out to engaging with perhaps the Croydon area about sharing expertise around innovation or around business aspects. So it's something that you've seen probably in some way, shape or form with universities like Cranfield and the like. We're looking at doing that in perhaps different ways, but probably more surrounding the innovation subject. Obviously, staff development and education and qualification in the business is the benefit of that. So, particularly at sort of higher levels within structures. So, talking a little bit more about commercialization, there's a number of things that we do within Sussex to try and break a number of problems that often exist within universities. First and foremost, rather surprisingly, that's about identifying the opportunities in the first place. As I said before, academics tend to be focused very much on the research, as opposed to looking, if you like, for the commercial opportunity in that research, the problem that it solves for a business. So there's an interesting opportunity there. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. Sometimes those opportunities are hidden, so where the research actually sits, not necessarily solving that problem that you would see the commercial opportunity in. And that's something that we think as an innovation centre we're quite well positioned to see, because we're working, if you like, within both parties. So what I put down there is opportunity translation. And again, the world of academia is fantastic at doing what it does, but sometimes, if you like, the value in the research is in the paper that's published. That paper could sometimes be 100 pages long in order to explain what the research is. From our point of view, for that to have value to a business, it probably needs to be a short paragraph to explain exactly what the problem is, how it solves it, and why it's different to anything else that's out there. That's something, again, that we help with, and it's something we use quite a lot in terms of how we display to the commercial world these opportunities that exist, so that you or other businesses can kind of see something and go, actually, that's relevant to me, as opposed to, have I got to sit down and go through a very, very long academic document and understand, or have a degree in physics in order to understand what it actually is saying. The process that we run at the university is headed up, if you like, it's funded by a process called the University's Enterprise Panel. And you can kind of think of the Enterprise Panel almost like a dragon's den for academics. It's a very supportive process, but it's a kind of 360 process of saying, why do you think your research has value? Who cares? How do we make a business case? Or how do we, if you like, validate a business case behind it if we're going to invest in protecting intellectual property, etc., etc. So what I mean by an inclusive process as well is that the academic is very much involved and takes part in the whole process of commercialization. Some universities have what they call tech transfer departments. Some of them will take intellectual property and patents away from the academic themselves, give them to someone that's a commercialization consultant that's qualified to perhaps a PhD level in a particular subject area, and it's left to them to go away and make those connections and commercialize. It's our belief, in the same way as you running a company, the value of what you do is your ambition, your passion behind the problem that you're actually solving, is by going perhaps down what can be a more complicated and harder route of involving the academic in the process is a better way, because they get to take part in the journey, and you get to also keep that passion in why they did the research in the first place to solve the problem integrated within the project. And that pays great dividends, and you get a little bit further down the line in terms of engaging with companies or commercializing products. We also go through a whole process then of validating, if you like, the problem that this research or this invention, innovation, whatever it is, actually solves. So that again is very similar to stuff that we've talked about here in the past in terms of basic market research, insight, engaging with the market in as early a possible stage as we can to understand, are we right in thinking that this piece of kit, this invention actually does solve this problem better than something else? It's also about understanding that to get a new product or a piece of research to market, you've got to be thinking about the innovation chains, not just the problem itself that you're solving. So if you're actually bringing, for instance, a new diagnostic for cancer to market, you've got to understand that you're going to change an operational change somewhere along the line. Clinicians have got to change their behaviour. You've got to understand, does it have to be bought in a different way? Is there a different piece of kit that needs to be in a laboratory somewhere for that to happen? There's all sorts of chains that are all attached to each other, but if you don't think of them, and in a commercial world you'd be thinking about a business model. In an academic world, it's almost this kind of academic chain model. It's very similar to a business model in a lot of ways, but often people just say that my product's better than yours, therefore people will buy it, which I think everyone in the room kind of knows is not true. We also use, if you like, the fact that we're an innovation centre and we have a large network of people that we've built up over the sort of 20 years that we've been in existence. We use that to engage with key partners, and we can have the credibility, if you like, of having that conversation as being the innovation centre at an early stage to kind of validate again, are we solving the right problem here? Where do I engage with that company? At what particular level in order to have a sensible conversation? That's really important, and it's a key thing that we can do as the Innovation Centre that it's very difficult to do when you're at an early stage with the technology. Very similar to the way that when you're an early stage startup, it's really difficult to have a conversation with what you might see as your ultimate potential customer, because they're busy, they don't have the time, and sometimes you'll lack the credibility for them to give you that time and that feedback. So it's a good way, if you like, of standing on our shoulders in order to have some of those early stage conversations. We then, through all those conversations, we're looking at what is the appropriate model, if there's a model at all. So, you know, it's a similar process. If we're going to fail, we'd rather fail informed, but fail early. Let's not waste loads and loads of money on patenting, going through various different European and national stages and racking up huge bills around patents, for instance. If we don't think the research has commercial value, it's better to know early, know why, and then move on to the next thing at the end of the day. And there's various different models around, do we spin a technology out? Part of that is that the appropriate model to start with? Part of it is, what is the ambition of the key academics that are involved within the project? You can't force people perhaps to get involved with different models like that, so sometimes it takes the routes that you could go down. And obviously there's licensing models if a patent or there's IP within the project itself. And something that we quite often do within the university is set up something called a university enterprise. So if our aim is that we think this could be a spin-out company, rather than go through all the hassle of setting that up with structures and registering companies and directors and all that sort of stuff, we'll run like a pseudo company within the university's financial systems, so that we can test the market, we can service a few customers, we can find out how that works before we go to the hassle of building all that various different landscape around it. We're very hands-on from a project support team wise, so a lot of the work that we will do in terms of setting up companies, licensing, negotiating licenses and all that sort of stuff, we're very involved with to provide, if you like, a cuddle around the whole process, and where the skills go beyond the skills that we have in-house, we're certainly not shy with, again, plugging into expertise in particular market segments or areas of expertise around intellectual property licensing in particular market areas and stuff like that. Some of that is complicated, it requires many years of experience and whatever else, so it's just about understanding that's the right model, how do we engage with the best people at the best time in order to make that happen. At any one time we have something like about between 20 and 25 active projects. Some of those are large, substantial projects around patents or IP. And some of them are smaller projects that, although may not make a lot of money commercially, also have strategic reasons as to why the university might be interested in trying to actually take them to market. And that comes back to that agenda that we talked about slightly earlier, which is the impact agenda for universities of taking some of these ideas out so they have actually an impact within society and might make a change. And as I said before, all this is enabled by the university's enterprise panel, which is headed up by Michael Davies, Professor Michael Davies, who's talked here before at various different events. And that panel is not only university people, it's independent business people as well that provide a completely different perspective and a different way of challenging and channeling some of these projects and moving them forwards. Okay. So if I give you a couple of examples of some of the projects that we've gone through, are currently being commercialised at the moment. The electric potential sensor is a piece of research, an intellectual property, well protected with a variety of different patents within the university. The University of Sussex would probably regard this in IP terms as their crown jewels. It's an electric field sensor that's highly sensitive, developed some 10 years ago by Professor Robert Prance there and some of his colleagues. And when we got involved with that project, it was one of the first projects we were involved with when we originally became wholly owned by the university. The university had tried to spin the project out into a spin-out company, which failed, and then the LP came back into the university again. And to give you an example of how we worked with the university to try and take this forward, when I first met Robert, we were looking at this and he was saying, well, it's a platform technology, it's got so many different applications that it could have. It can potential for early detection of earthquakes, non-destructive testing, there's healthcare applications, driver drowsiness, and there was about 10 or 15 of these different applications. So one of the first things that we did, and you might well say this is common sense, is to say, okay, how do we pick perhaps two of those that one are at a sort of a stage whereby we could demonstrate them, we could potentially prove a sort of proof of concept that we could bring to companies to say this is how it works. And then how do we engage with companies or stakeholders in that area in order to get them in, to get their feedback and understand truly, because they're the only people that can tell you how this compares with other technologies that are out there, other solutions. And we went through, I personally talked to and met with probably 100, 120 different companies in different areas where we understood how it would be applied within security applications, how it would be supplied within health, how it might work within automotive for driver drowsiness. And through those conversations, we also got involved with a semiconductor manufacturer called Plessey, who ultimately we ended up licensing the technology to, and we still work closely with in order to take the market, take the products, if you like, to market. Interestingly, that journey as well has proved that the technology is pretty disruptive in that market, and because it works differently, we've had to go down the route of actually developing products using the technology. And you see one there on the lower part of the screen called the Impulse. And we managed to secure £1 million of funding effectively through the NHS that has allowed us to develop that product, and an accompanying app that allows doctors' surgeries or GP surgeries, when you go in, you can just hold your hands on that unit and it will provide a very accurate signal and an early stage diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. That's really interesting value for GPs, because beforehand, an ECG was only something that you ever got when you had a heart problem. And there's a real problem with that for a GP, because they don't know what your ECG looked like before you had a heart problem. It's very difficult to kind of help them provide the right treatments and solutions and the like. So this should be the first solution that plugs into GP's systems, and when you go in and have your blood pressure taken and they listen to your heart, etc., 10 seconds on this and they will get a high quality ECG recorded to your patient record, so right as every time you go along. So very interesting. It's also being integrated into car seat backs with all the top car manufacturers through a variety of very large tier 1 suppliers that make car seats, people like Faurecia and whatever else that make those. The idea of that is an array of these that sit in the back of your seat that kind of detect the changes, the subtle changes in your heart rate as you start to get drowsy and you're driving along. And there are many, many other applications that people are experimenting with, not least incorporating it into the back of a mobile phone, so you'll be able to do this as part of having your mobile device at the same time.
And that was born from which sector? Which sector is the professor from?
So he's within engineering. So you might see it more as kind of physics, really, to be honest, but rather strangely he comes out of engineering within the university. So it's a fascinating technology, that, you know, and some of the other, interestingly, some of the other applications now, this is starting to move on. Things like how do you detect tiny voltages in rocks as they crack, for looking at bridge structures and finding out, you know, all those sorts of things as to what state concrete is in, etc., or potentially in years to come, could you predict an earthquake coming perhaps 10 or 15 minutes before it actually happens? Would be an interesting technology, but again, from the point of view of the research, that's further out. In terms of stuff that's come through the medical school, we've had a variety of different cancer diagnostics and diagnostics around areas like sepsis. Within the cancer sector, this is using blood-based tests to detect something called microRNA. It's going to circulate within your blood, and there's 2,500 or so known microRNA that you can identify within your blood. And all these different things, you can imagine them as tiny little markers that go up and down according to whether your body's working right or whether there's a particular illness or disease within it. So some of the research that you see Dr. Newbury there has isolated a particular microRNA that work together that allow you to show, in this case, whether you have something nasty cancer called myeloma, into multiple myeloma, there's not really any cure for, and also skin cancer and melanoma. And the important thing about some of these is understanding again, where does the value sit for the medical community, for the drugs companies, for the diagnostics companies? Because to develop something like this and take it to market, it's many millions of pounds. So they have to have a monopoly in that area, and they have to have something that is implementable within a surgery, within a hospital. And interestingly, with something like melanoma, the current diagnosis is you go into a GP and they kind of look at it often under a little magnifying glass and kind of go, oh, doesn't look quite right. And then they'll send you off to a specialist, they'll take a sample of it, send it off. In the meantime, you're pretty stressed, you're worrying whether you've got cancer or not, so the patient is in a hell of a state. The doctor really is powerless to kind of have anything until it comes back from the lab. And when you go into treatment with drugs, and there's some fantastic new drugs for this particular cancer out there, the drug company's problem again is different. They know that you've got it, but what they want to know is, as you're being treated for it, is the drug working? So, is the cancer receding or going to remission or whatever that may be? So the problem that they have and the solution they want is very different, but entangled into the same product. So from a point of view of drug treatment for myeloma or for melanoma, the drug companies, for want of a better expression, want to get you on the drug as early as possible so that they make as much money as possible, and then when you come off remission of it, and take you off at the right time. Or if they've got you on the wrong drug, to know that it's not working for you and they should try something different. So all different parts of the market have different problems. And unless we understand that, we don't know where to position the innovation within the market. TexRad, and apologies, some of these are quite sort of technical, as you kind of expect, but that's not always the case. I'll talk about one in a minute that really isn't. TexRad, Dr. Balaji Ganeshan there came up with basically a software solution that uses texture analysis, and that texture analysis software can see things in cancer scans that a radiologist cannot see with their human eye. So early signs of cancer that would be for a surgeon or whatever else very useful to know about. So if you were operating on a particular tumour, it would be useful to know that there's also a sort of a pre-cancerous stage going on there, whatever it may be. And again, from a drug treatment point of view. So in Balaji's case, we spun that out into a separate company to get some investment into it, and it's since been sold again. And it's a piece of software hopefully you can expect to see in some of the big pieces of kit before very long. Some of the less obvious, pathological worry. This has come out of the psychology school, so some really interesting research done by Professor Davey. This is about understanding that there's a lot of people before they go into more advanced stages of kind of depression and mental problems that just worry a lot, and they go round and round and round in circles worrying. And you'll see some elements of this in OCD and whatever else, obsessive compulsive disorder. And he's come up with a very clever solution through his research, which is around tools and processes that you can get people to learn that allows them, if you like, to break out of some of these problems. At the moment, again, where would you take something like that and how would people engage with it? And there's some interesting stuff that we're looking at the moment within the student population. So at particular times within study or with exams coming up, they get themselves into a hell of a state worrying about, will I get a first, will I get this, will I get that? And that also exists within schools. So it's about finding the people that have the problem, how do they solve it now? Would it be best delivered as an app on a mobile, as an iPad? Would it just be a software solution problem? Should it be something that should be paper-based? They're all questions that, unless we answer it at the beginning, we've no idea. But actually, it kind of came to us about really just a discussion with a guy for half an hour saying, this is what I do research-wise. So that idea of saying, how do you connect a problem with some other piece of research is sometimes really quite fascinating. So, how could all this have value to your business as you move forwards? The relationship with the university, if it's something that we can open up, is being the first to know, if you like, about interesting research, interesting collaboration opportunities that are actually out there. It's a fantastic recruitment source for skills, whatever they may be. There's all sorts of different study at different levels going on there. And I think within Croydon, before the Innovation Centre here, the university will be having a presence in terms of presenting their careers and employments department up here, so there'll be a link with skills coming out of Sussex for companies that are actually here within the network as well, so a good way of tapping into those skills. We have Catalyst team support here within the centre that we can talk to Saffron about, and Mark that is around here somewhere. There's collaborations and consultancy. Do you need an injection of, if you like, really high-level expertise in a particular area that could help you unblock a problem? They could be in all sorts of different areas, and some of the fascinating ones we're seeing at the moment are around data, big data, and some of the skills that come out of the maths and physics schools in terms of how you break down and you build new algorithms in order to solve some of those problems. Ultimately, professional development as the university moves out and perhaps looks at how it can share some of the skills and knowledge it has within business school, etc. And other activities that we do as well, we're experimenting with student hack days. So if you're trying to solve a particular problem around data or around building an algorithm, how can you give that to 5 or 10 PhDs in a particular area and challenge them with solving that problem for you? It's something you see quite a lot, you know, now in sort of hack days that go on elsewhere. But by plugging it into certain levels and certain specialities, there's a lot you can achieve there. So, all sorts of stuff, really, to be honest. I think I've bored you for long enough. I've talked a lot, so if you've got any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Yeah. How would we go about engaging the university in order to validate hypotheses which we might be basing a product on? So is that too vague a question? Or I could contextualise.
It's an interesting question. It depends on where your product is and if you like what the skills are that you're looking for. Universities are often places to find, as I said during the talk, they're difficult places to isolate if you like the right expertise, the right character, and a bit like business. There's almost a dating process that goes on here for me, is that part of it is about the skills, part of it is about the meeting of personalities and whatever else that are actually in the room. It's something that we do quite a lot through working with companies, and it's often through that sort of research commercialization stage, just looking at what's the problem, what's the solution, that we're able to plug into the right place in the university to do that. Universities in general, otherwise, you probably would go to find an appropriate school, and then through that school you would try and find the appropriate academic. But that can be a bit hit and miss. So
the problem is that often universities like to run things over a 1-year period.
Yep.
Commercially, that's often somewhat too long.
Absolutely right. So universities often work on a
coming
time scale.
Yeah,
so they'll often look at collaborations around an Innovate UK grant or whatever that may be. That opens over the next 12 months, 3 years, whatever, and that's not a commercial time scale for you to take a product out there, solve a problem. So sometimes it's around making that initial connection and then exploring how that could be done in a different way, whether it's something that you could fund separately, whether it's something that could have a small amount of a high level of expertise, but then a PhD doing something, perhaps within some other kind of route. So it really depends on how that work is going to be funded and how substantial that piece of work is. But there isn't a simple answer to that, I'm afraid. I wish there was. But if you have more specifics about it, we're happy to chat afterwards and see how to solve it.
Is this innovation and commercialisation all focused on products? Could it equally be around programs, services?
No, it's not always products. It can be around innovative services. And one of the unusual things in the commercialisation work that we do is that an awful lot of universities tend to focus on intellectual property as being the guiding light for whether something can be taken forwards or not. We've seen, we encourage projects to come forwards that have no, if you like, IP protection around them. The pathological worry is an example of that. Is that we're looking really for what is the value, what problem does it solve, and then what would the commercial relationship be or the model be after that. So it can be just interesting research or research that we believe has commercial value. But sometimes you can destroy a lot of those or discount a lot of those projects at an early stage simply because there's no IP protection. And in reality, a lot of projects that do have IP protection, you find out as you go through that process that the value is in the know-how and often within the data as you go through to the later stages of those projects. So sometimes the patent can be a bit of a red herring. In its entirety, everyone thinks everything is all based around the patent. It's based around a lot more than that.
Yes. What's the time frame? You talked about the University Enterprise Panel. You talked about this sort of fail fast approach.
Yeah.
What's the timeline and the qualification process typically?
Okay, so it's a really interesting question, and it kind of relates back to the kind of timelines that universities often work to are much longer. You can get your meeting, they might be saying, I could meet in September, and it'll be all right, so I'll finish marking. The University Enterprise Panel, one of the objectives when we sent it up was to make it responsive and reactive, if you like, so that we move things through quickly. So if someone has an idea, they don't have reams of paper or invention disclosures and things to fill out. They just come and have a chat with us in the centre. We talk about it. If we think there's some potential there, we'll encourage them to produce a simple presentation that just doesn't talk about the research so much, but talks about the problem it solves, what's the market, what else is out there already, other university benefits that might actually be there, what's stopping you from going ahead now. So we sort of bring it back into our world, if you like. And then from that, there's a quick decision-making process as to early forms of support in terms of can we help you understand and engage with the market to put a more substantive case around next stages that you need. Or, again, what's needed is there some sort of proof of concept or prototype that might be needed to be funded to a relatively low level. It's trying to sort of build up levels of knowledge and levels of risk at the same time. But from the academics' point of view, if they make a presentation on one panel, they can expect a decision within a week as to what that funding actually is, move it forwards, and our support against that will happen straight away. So it's a very different model to the one that they're used to saying, I'll apply to Innovate UK, put that in, wait 6 months, and move it forward. So we're trying to spot the opportunities early and support them to build them and take them forward quickly. If they fail, then they fail integrating the academic into the process so they know why. So it's not like someone's told them it doesn't have value, go away. They've actually been involved in those conversations and the research in the early stages, so they feel that they're taken part to it, taken a real integral part of it. And the interesting thing about that is we have several academics now that are coming back on their second or third projects where the first one hasn't worked out for whatever reason, but they've really enjoyed being integrated into the process and they come back again. And that's a real win for us because they're learning as part of it. And it's important again to know that we all have different skills in different areas, and academics, they're focused perhaps on their academic area. So when they come to the Innovation Centre and we start talking about commercialisation, it's a knowledge area where they're relatively light in terms of skills. So it sometimes can feel like they're exposing themselves from being a professor in one area to being someone that knows very little in another. So it's a teamwork exercise at the end of the day as well. So Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I didn't want to monopolise the questioning, get chat after, but one of the things that I guess is you hear the right noises from universities and then you get going.
Yeah.
And then for reasons which are probably sensible, the timelines just drift and drift. And I'm not talking about Sussex, but I'm just talking about in general.
Yes.
It could be that you're working with a PhD who then can't jeopardise their PhD to then help commercially.
Yeah.
They can't balance their time to do both.
Yes.
And as a business, you're then without them, then you can't really move forward.
Yes.
But I guess that's a typical story.
It is a problem that we have to face and kind of deal with. And part of the reason with having the enterprise panel as a separate group is there are monthly panel meetings. So part of that's about looking at new projects, but a huge part of it is about managing the progress of projects as they move forwards as well. So part of the purpose and, if you like, the driver behind that the academics have to buy into is that we're trying to do this piece of work by then in order to move on to the next stage. So we are trying to set a very different agenda through the work that we do through the panel as to sometimes what happens with research projects where, as you say, there are conflicting kind of deadlines and objectives around can't do anything this month because that's this and that. I think that's fairly typical within universities, unfortunately. Managing that, I guess, and staying on top of it is the key. And again, part of it is about finding the right academics, the right skills, and that shared level of ambition around taking something to the next stage. It isn't just something else that they're doing; it's something they're passionate about solving and taking on. So it kind of comes back to this idea that it's like business; it's a kind of dating exercise to find the right person. If you find the right person, you're both pulling hard in the same direction. But it is a problem. I cannot deny that. Hello.
So I guess that sort of ties in with the pathological worry, though, doesn't it? Because for the PhD student, they're going through that extra stress.
Yeah.
Right? So is there like any sort of support for the PhD student that's actually doing the research for the industry?
There sometimes are. If we talk about Balaji with the TextRad innovation, he was actually a PhD student when he came up with that. So he wanted to take it forwards and was brought through with the school, and the university had to go through a process because only the IP, if you like, from the academics that are employed by the university actually is owned by the university. Balaji decided that he wanted the university to support and, if you like, the money and resources that they could put behind it in order to drive it forwards. So the university ended up employing him in order to take that forwards, transferring the IP into the university's ownership, which he still then gets a very good share of if it's successful. But moving it into a model where we were able to help him, yes. But PhDs themselves, there's differing levels of whether the university does or doesn't own that IP. So if it's something IP related or patent related, then that does complicate things. Students, of course, they own everything that they do themselves. So bringing them into the process is probably through the student entrepreneurship activity of giving them skills to be able to take an idea forwards themselves, build a business model around it, and then look for ways that they can fund it, take it forwards, build relationships and the like. So try and cover everything that is difficult. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, it does. I just maybe like in terms of like time and everything to handle that work as well. I mean, I'm a PhD graduate, so
Yeah.
I kind of know like that sort of tying in,
Yeah.
like with then having like a company that's kind of on your case and
Yeah.
developing products.
Yes.
You kind of need that extra support.
Yeah.
Probably one observation to make is that for PhD students, it might seem it's important to get the PhD done.
Yeah.
In their future life, it's important to go and do something.
Yes.
So actually, the academia is holding back that person's career by saying, yes, you really have to get this paper finished. But actually, getting involved in a project that's getting commercialised means that they will have a choice of jobs in the university. Having said, I won't do that, I'll carry on my PhD work, actually says you're probably not suitable for the commercial world. And that's where you have to think. I mean, it's interesting what you've been saying about the programme. My question was, have you started directing where the university looks to do its research work on what the customer need out in the market is?
We do in terms of, I mean, so for instance, if you look at the EPS project, out of the relationship with Plessy have come some fascinating pieces of research that are very much engaged in the commercial problem. So there's a lot of research income that's come back into the university through that relationship, simply because it's anchored, if you like, the technology into solving a problem for the commercial world. So vice versa, probably not. So we're not looking at the university and going, would that piece of research, if we started it, be instantly valuable in that sector?
So I think about leading institutions around the world, the ones that come to mind are the ones who focus on doing things for the outside world.
Yeah.
So if you look at German's engineering schools, if you look at Singapore, etc., it's all focused. If you look at Guildford, they're focused on what can we sell and commercialise, which then provides the funding such that we can be a great academic institution. And I think Sussex is going that way, but it's a learning journey to take people to say, actually, the world out there as academics is you've got to be producing stuff that's valued, because funding is not going to come through the usual routes in the future, and more funding comes from the commercial world if you start fitting in. It might not really know what the commercial outcome is, but if at least you're playing in the field that you need to come into.
Yes, and there's a number of things in terms of grant bodies like Innovate, where that's driven very much from the commercial partner setting the agenda. So that's quite interesting. And as you say, you're absolutely right in terms of how do you set an agenda around Space Research Centre or whatever it may be into solving problems around that. And also what's interesting for us is as we take people through that process and we engage them again and again, they're thinking very differently about how their research applies. And sometimes in an academic's mind, perhaps it's my perception of it, there's this boundary between what is academic and what is commercial, whereas in reality there are as many academics in the commercial world. It's just about how you apply and where you direct that research and those skills. So I think, yes, it would be a perfect scenario really to be setting agendas and then putting people towards solving the specific problems that are out there. But,
and the interesting,
it's a slow change.
The interesting that's happening is you're going to have a commercial setting for universities where fees are going to be set by universities according to quality of their delivery of training. Those universities get high fees, and we're looking to take over universities that are poorly performing and sort courses out and run more efficient, larger courses, because actually that's the model you can see. I mean, I think Glasgow University now has a campus in London, etc. You're seeing universities actually will coincide, and institutions will suddenly find they won't be doing things they like, they'll be doing things that the body that's now taken them over thinks they should be doing. And it's going to be quite an interesting time in the academic world when that fee debate comes in, and people see what that does to it.
Yes, and how the model of even education changes into a lot of the stuff that you're seeing with Stanford and MIT, where they're taking lectures to video, if you like, and then when you come back in, you spend a lot more time with the senior skills within the school, if you like, to solve particular problems. So you get a lot more one-on-one, higher quality of education, and you can watch the lectures as many times as you like. And that way, the professors and whatever else they're lecturing don't spend all their time delivering the same thing year after year after year. So it's all sorts of different models and things. It's quite an exciting sector at the moment. There's a lot of change, a lot of challenge.
Wonderful.
Good. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks
Pete.
for
It was really interesting. So everyone will be very happy that you came along and given all this information to us. So thank you. Thanks for coming. We've got some new phases here. We do this regularly, third Wednesday of every month. We've had our first month was on investment readiness. So then we had PR training, scaling up, crowdfunding, and now academic collaboration. So we're sort of adding lots of different elements of business to help those businesses scale, which are members with us and non-members. But we're always looking for new members. We've got lots of space here, so we want you guys to look out for those companies who are looking to scale and are doing something different with great ambition, looking to create jobs in the local areas. That's the reason Sussex has invested in Croydon. Just to make you aware of a few things that we've got coming up, we've got Cedars coming here on the 26th, next Thursday evening, talking about equity crowdfunding. So it's a really good event for you to come along, and welcome to come and join us. Hopefully you're all on my mailing list if you're not going to speak to me at the end. Next month we'll have Paul Jordan here talking about innovation. What is innovation? Some people are still not quite sure about what innovation is. So again, third Wednesday next month. And then on the 21st of June, it's London Technology Week. There's a lot going on in Croydon that week, so please keep in touch with us about what's happening. There'll be events here and events in Central Croydon for Croydon Tech City, so be aware of that as well. coming, and lunchtime is now over.
Good start, yeah.
You can go lunch after. Thanks
Thank you,
again.
guys.
Yeah, good man, how are you?
Yeah, busy. Enough news. Has it been
Yeah, it's been good. Oh my god, stop.